Turn on the TV, read the news, quiet quitting, crime culture, mass layoffs even when companies are making money hand over fist, stress, burnout, and if you're lucky, you get a pizza party. That's what it feels like for a lot of people. Now, what if I told you that all of this is the fault of a set of actions accelerated and perfected by one man? A man who was hailed as a hero at the time, an innovator, a new kind of CEO who blazed trails in all sorts of ways. But also a man whose actions, decisions, leadership style, and innovations are the cause of many of the things that make working a nightmare today. Well, this person is real, and his name was Jack Welch. This is the story of how Jack Welch shaped the way businesses are run and how employees are treated in global corporations today. Today, GE, General Electric, is not a company that most people pay attention to. Today, it's Apple, Meta, Google. But in GE's heyday, it was an organization that instilled pride in its employees, but also in broader society. It was founded by Thomas Edison. Yes, that guy. GE was the modern corporation, a conglomerate that spanned power, appliances, aviation, healthcare, even finance. GE was seen as a nation-building company. It wasn't just a corporate profit machine. The company was also led on what we today call a principle of managerial capitalism. That meant that management saw that they had a responsibility to employees, communities, and the long-term health of the firm. GE invested massively in management training. GE Crotonville was a craft. It was a craft that took time to hone and develop. This was an organization that was run with a long-term focus. It was managed for stability and continuity and long-term sustainability, and it was one of those companies you really, really wanted to work for. Jack Welch joined GE in 1960. In 1968, he got his first vice president job. By 1977, he was named Senior Vice President of Consumer Products and Services. By the standards for the time, this was a relatively fast progression. In 1981, he became GE's youngest chairman and CEO. At the time of his ascent in the 70s and 80s, the world was changing. The 1970s were marked by inflation, stagflation, oil crises, and a beginning decline of American manufacturing dominance. The US economy was under pressure in a whole lot of ways. In 1970, an economist called Milton Friedman published a paper, a set of thoughts on what the role of business was, which at its core was quite different from how GE and most other American companies and global companies ran their businesses. Milton Friedman argued that a business's only reason for being should be profit-making, and that should supersede any level of corporate responsibility to the community or to employees. To Milton Friedman, the business of business was only business. This was incredibly appealing to shareholders and leaders because it made running a business so much simpler, more unconstrained, and potentially much more profitable. These factors also fed into an outside world where Wall Street saw a growing influence on businesses and their decisions, and where conglomerates like GE were seen as bloated, ineffective, and not agile enough to compete in a globalized world. The groundwork was laid for change, and Jack Welch, well, he was the guy who went to work. I'm Mike, and this is the channel Work Unusual, which covers businesses and careers. If you're enjoying this video and other content on my channel, the best way to support this channel is by clicking the subscribe button. It helps out a ton, so please do so. Thanks a ton. In 1981, Jack Welch steps in. His first speech was titled Growing Fast in a Slow Growth Economy, and it was the starting pistol gun to a focus on delivering shareholder value. Until his retirement, GE's market value went from $12 billion to $410 billion. He acquired other companies left, right, and center and massively expanded GE into global markets. GE grew massively. They were hugely profitable, and his tenure at GE at the time was largely seen as a huge success. And from a people perspective, how did he do it? He fired people. From 1980 to 1985, GE's headcount dropped from 411,000 employees to 299,000. Some disappeared because of the selling off of non-core businesses, but at least 80,000 were laid off or exited in other ways outright. Welch also implemented an, at the time, revolutionary performance management approach that had several components. He implemented the now famous rank and yank approach, which forced the 10% worst performing staff out every single year, regardless of how business performed and regardless of how good or bad the bad performance was. He implemented aggressive models. The top employees received sizable bonuses, and something that wasn't that common back then, a larger share of employee compensation for top performers became stock options. The top 20%, and the bottom 10 for that matter, were not ranked on 2 or 4 or 10-year business performance. They were measured on something as short-term as in-year performance and even on quarterly results. In his tenure, stock options went from being something only senior executives had to something that was available to over a third of all staff at GE. All of this meant that for him, performance was about survival. If you weren't delivering now, you had an existential problem. He also implemented the 1 or 2 rule. The idea was, if GE couldn't be first or second in a market, it should be fixed, sold, or shut down. Fixing often involved reducing costs, and that meant aggressive layovers, even in businesses where there was profitability and growth. But if you were number 3, it wasn't good enough. Welch had explicitly or implicitly embraced the thoughts of Milton Friedman. To Welch, employees were resources, not stakeholders. Managers were there to deliver results. And in a sense, this made sense because this was a man running a business in a world where the US was under pressure and the Japanese and others were coming for our jobs and our markets. To him, organizations needed to move faster than the world around them to stay ahead. And he executed essentially ruthlessly, single-mindedly even. There was no deviation. Results were what mattered, and more than anything, the shareholders' reaction was what he cared about. In the years following his exit, GE people and general disciples of his approach spread to other companies, Home Depot, Boeing, Microsoft even. To this day, we see Jack Welch's fingerprints in almost every Western firm on the planet. Most companies have some sort of annual performance ranking process where in-year performance is assessed against KPIs, OKRs, and objectives. It starts at the top and it works its way down. Forced distributions are, although not as common as they have been, still prevalent. The completely distilled fire the bottom 10% approach isn't as explicit in companies these days, but there is an expectation often that low performance, by whatever definition is agreed upon, are counseled out throughout the year. Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, wherever you look, there are companies that on paper are doing at a minimum fine, but still use layoffs to further grow the bottom line or sometimes just get, a stock price bump. Employment terms have also been impacted. Subcontractors, gig workers, outsourcing, anti-union actions, wherever possible, organizations optimize for flexibility of employment, not for stability. Being able to get rid of people is more important than knowledge continuity. Onboarding, offboarding, knowledge management emphasize the focus on independence from the individual. AI is also seen as a way of making a company less dependent on the single individual. The employee is a variable cost and is managed as such. And CEOs, high-level executives, and even employees have increasingly large parts of their compensation tied to the share price. Which brings us to today. Pizza parties are symbolic acknowledgements of employees' contributions. They emphasize an immediate, short-lived reward. A pension plan that vests while you remain at the company rarely exists in the form that they did in the 60s. The kind of long-term retention incentives that were commonplace 50 years ago are largely gone today. There's no reward that incentivizes an employee to stay at the company, and as a result, people don't stay. Performance management systems incentivize short-term behaviors, chasing in-year KPIs and not focusing on long-term structural fixes. Software is released with flaws on day one. Minimum viable product. Time to market is more important than the quality of the product. The connection to shares also incentivizes short-term behavior for CEOs and for staff. When there's no incentive to stay, there's no incentive to go the extra mile, where there's no perceived loyalty from the employer to the employees don't reciprocate. And it drives the behaviors that we see. Managers sandbag on performance so that they have things to cut when the inevitable layoff round comes around. Employees shift blame. They avoid important, difficult tasks if they risk it affecting their annual appraisals. In Microsoft, this behavior led to decreased internal mobility because people would stay in well-performing teams, knowing that taking a chance with a strategic product that might fail would hurt their appraisal and their bonuses. Grind culture too. It's a behavior that speaks to the top 20%. It emphasizes individualism and it demonizes setting boundaries. If you're not competing, you're a loser. Jack Welch wasn't the only one that did this. Other companies experimented with forced ranking, shareholder value optimization, and so on. But nobody embodied these principles like Jack Welch did. And he perfected it. This was a man that left no stone unturned in the hunt for shareholder value. Jack Welch didn't break the modern workplace. He professionalized it. He took ideas that already existed, shareholder value, performance ranking, cost cutting, and turned them into systems that were repeatable and scalable and normal. And once those systems worked at GE, they spread everywhere. So when your company treats you like a number, when loyalty feels one-sided, when performance feels less like growth and more like survival, that's not an accident. It's a legacy. Jack Welch didn't just run General Electric. He designed the rules of work that we're all still playing by today. Share your thoughts in the comments. Remember to subscribe. See you soon.